That there was a hearing today, and it was with the House Judiciary Committee. I have some clips to present, so we'll play them and go along. Christopher Wray is before this committee answering questions on an array of issues. It was all under the very broad umbrella of oversight of the FBI. So you could, Republicans and Democrats could say pretty much whatever they wanted to Christopher Wray, raise whatever pet issue. Some of them did bring up the issue that is of the utmost importance, which is related to the reauthorization of Section 702, these surveillance powers that are going to come before the end of the year, which we know about thanks to Edward Snowden, NSA whistleblower. So let me play this. The first thing we're going to play here is from Representative Cori Bush, and here she is highlighting with FBI Director as she questions the FBI Director. She is raising the FBI's history of COINTELPRO, of targeting Black activists, Sam Brown activists, and particularly giving attention to how you see some of that continuing with the FBI today.
Today, in continuing solidarity with the protesters, the advocates, and movements that are actually targeted by surveillance and other law enforcement abuses in this country. Director Wray, I know that you are aware of the FBI's long and sordid history of targeting Black protesters and activists. At a hearing before this committee in December of 2017, you characterized the abuses related to COINTELPRO as, quote, one of the darker moments in the FBI's history. It's something we're not proud of, but it is also something we've learned from, end quote. But Director Wray, isn't it true that an FBI agent improperly ran a batch query of unminimized FISA information using the identifiers of 133 individuals arrested in connection with the protests after the murder of George Floyd in 2020? Just a yes or no is fine.
Well, I'm aware of the instance you're talking about. Whether or not that correctly describes it or not, I'm not 100% sure. I know it's in the most recent FISC opinion, but what I will tell you is that incident is non-compliance. I consider it unacceptable, and most importantly, it predates all of these fixes and corrective measures and reforms that we've put in place, which I think would have prevented it from happening now.
Thank you. And now on to Zero Fox. Isn't it true?
Well, first, I just want to say that we haven't seen evidence that these reforms put in place by the FBI would actually stop that. And haven't seen anything from both Democrats and Republicans in the House in particular that says that they believe that the FBI is doing it better, or that they have confidence that they wouldn't commit these abuses. And what we see regularly in these secret court opinions that we don't get to see until like 2-3 years after they get issued in many cases, what we're finding is that they're constantly these violations or circumventing of the rules or abuse of the power and all of that these judges on the secret court acknowledge and bring to the attention of the government, and then they're dealt with very privately, and they try to just sort of sweep them under the rug so we don't have a conversation about them, and that's what's evident in here. That's what's evident in this. As you watch this hearing, you can tell that Christopher Wray wants to just sort of like brush this aside as nothing that should be discussed very extensively.
A firm hired on a $14 million contract by the FBI, which we've heard already today, to monitor social media threats. Contract by the FBI, which we've heard already today, to monitor social media threats, previously labeled Black Lives Matter activists as threat actors, requiring constant surveillance. Yes or no?
I'm not sure that's a correct description of the way we do work with Zero Fox, but I don't know that that's a correct description of how we do it.
So did the FBI hire the firm?
My understanding of Zero Fox is it has a tool which allows us to in certain instances, engage in social media searches to prevent threats.
So the
But the
so they weren't
specifics
hired.
of the well, I don't know, again, the terms of our arrangement, like whether, whether it's a retention or what, but I've heard the term Zero Fox before. And in my general experiences, it's usually used in connection with preventing violence at a particular critical incident of some sort.
So to the
Okay, so not useful at all. Christopher Wray, maybe he knows, maybe he legitimately doesn't know, but this show, we don't have to just accept his hemming and hawing. We can actually address what Zero Fox was doing as the firm that was brought on to do this quote unquote continuous monitoring, or what we will call surveillance. I'm not going to use these euphemisms that the government creates for us. This is surveillance, or total surveillance, and then the words get changed to continuous monitoring. And so the report from this was in The Intercept. This came from Ken Klippenstein. This is what Corey Bush was referring to, and it's from uh, July 6th. The headline was FBI hired social media surveillance firm that labeled Black Lives Matter organizers threat actors. Threat actors is in quotes. There's a new Senate report that calls out the FBI for lying to Congress about its social media monitoring and points out the FBI hired this firm. So this contractor, what is it? Well, first off, the thing that is upsetting to Corey Bush is that there were these leaders of BLM. This was around the time that Michael Brown was murdered, and by a police officer, by a Ferguson police officer, Darren Wilson. And D. Ray McKesson and Jonetta Elzie were labeled as threat actors in 2015. We're learning about this. It's now been 8 years. The contractor did this with no evidence that they were suspected of engaging in criminal activity. And a spokesperson for Zero Fox said that it's been almost a decade since the referenced 2015 incident. And in that time, we have invested heavily in fine tuning our collections, analysis, and labeling of alerts, yada, yada. Okay, so we didn't do anything wrong. But the FBI is an agency that just has to be held accountable to the people they are contracting, to the firms they are contracting. They hired Zero Fox in 2021, and they used Zero Fox for the uprising at the U.S. Capitol, and the bureaus brought authorities to surveil social media content. Basically, they have been denying that they were using these authorities. It also has revealed the FBI's reliance on outside companies to do many of the filtering of this content. It's a $14 million contract. They describe it as social media alerting, and it replaces a contract with another firm, Data Miner, which was also previously exposed as targeting racial justice movements. And then so there's just a whole lot going on here with this firm, and it's very clear that they were allowed to do this. The threat report that they were criticized for, um, well, Janetta Elzie said that it shows that they were pretty incompetent. The FBI's analysis of social media was they described a visit that the FBI paid her parents in 2016, telling them that it was imperative she not attend the Republican National Convention in Cleveland, an event she says she had no intention of attending, in which troll accounts on Twitter bearing her name claimed she would be at to foment violence. So then the FBI came and were questioning her about these trolls that were making up that she was planning to go to the RNC. And it all comes, needless to say, Janetta Elzie doesn't believe that the Zero Fox should be getting $14 million from the FBI, the same FBI that knocked on my family's door in Missouri and looked for me when it was world news that I was in Baton Rouge at the time. They're just very unserious, both organizations. So yeah, shoddy work, but also the kind of work that you would expect in the public-private partnership of targeting dissident groups. All right. Let's continue here.
Tune of $14 million, though there is reporting that threat actors was actually what they label Black Lives Matter activists, two of whom I know very well. And I served more than 400 days on the ground during the Ferguson uprising myself, more than 400 days, many of those days with those two people that were named and who are not violent. Isn't it true that the FBI has been actively involved in the law enforcement response to people protesting the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center, a response that has included state charges of domestic terrorism against protesters? Yes or no?
Well, our Atlanta division is working in support of our state and local partners when it comes to violence and threats of violence that occur amid the unrest that you're referring to.
So the FBI is involved.
Right. So Christopher Wray is saying that the FBI is supporting the targeting. He's spinning it. He's using different language, but he's admitting that the domestic terrorism charges that are being leveled by a Republican governor in the state of Georgia, highly political charges, terribly controversial, being used to dismantle and make it impossible for activists to challenge the construction of the Cop City compound, which will destroy entire area of forest land, which has been described as a kind of lungs for people of Georgia, helping them to manage some of the worst impacts of climate change, which we're seeing throughout the country. That he is in fact saying that those domestic terrorism charges, those political cases, those people who are being detained without bail, if they can't afford it, some of these bail, what they're being expected to pay in order to get out of jail while they're in what we can call pretrial confinement, effectively, because they have been charged, that those are substantial, and that they are doing this in a way that is intended to bankrupt. They're going after the Solidarity Fund that raises funds to get people out of jail after they are arrested at protests. They're supposed to be peaceful, lest the cops make them and make them violent. And we've already seen Tortuguita was murdered by a cop, a Georgia officer, and so here he is admitting that they are part of this. So the federal government is involved in the targeting of this group, these groups of people that are trying to control their community and not have all of these corporate interests, as well as, I don't know, call it the public safety industrial complex, if you will. I don't think it's a public safety, though. Let's call it the police industrial, the cop industrial complex. These different corporate firms that are going to benefit from a massive compound for police training, a kind of Disneyland for cops. So that's Cori Bush, and I think she makes some really good points there to the FBI director. Another moment from this that needs to be shared is the exchange that took place here with Pramila Jayapal, and here she is asking about this data brokering. This is something that needs more attention, and here she is asking about the FBI purchasing location data from these companies.
In testimony to Senate Intelligence in March, you stated that the FBI had previously purchased commercial database information that includes location data derived from internet advertising, but that to your knowledge, the FBI does not currently purchase data. But just last month, the ODNI declassified a report revealing that the FBI and other agencies do purchase significant amounts of commercially available information about Americans from data brokers. And the report notes that commercially available information, quote, has increasingly important risks and implications for U.S. persons' privacy and civil liberties, as commercially available information can reveal sensitive and intimate information about individuals. It is public information that the FBI uses Babel Street and Vental and has a Lexus account. All of these companies provide data for purchase. Can you tell me how the FBI uses that data?
Respectfully, this is a topic that gets very involved to explain, and so what I would prefer to do is have our subject matter experts come back up and brief you, and they can answer your questions in detail about it, because there's a lot of confusion that can be unintentionally caused about this topic.
But does the FBI purchase data?
My testimony that you referred to before remains the same. And the story about the ODNI report doesn't change that. But again, there's a lot of precision and technical dimensions to this.
Well, I do appreciate that, but I'm looking at a report that is from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence saying that the FBI purchases data. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter this into the record.
Objection.
Do you know if the contracts with data brokers like the ones I described provide location data?
My testimony about purchasing commercial database information that includes location data derived from internet advertising remains the same, which is that we currently do not do that.
But the information that you have that has already been purchased, does it contain location
Again,
information?
I'm not trying to be obtuse or difficult here. I just know from experience that the more you drill into this whole issue of commercial data, geolocation data, et cetera, that it gets very involved. In some cases involves pilot projects that are in the past. In some cases it involves national
Director
security
Wray,
information, et
I
cetera.
do understand.
Again, I'm not trying to not answer your question by just filibustering, knowing that as I watch the clock tick down, you're eventually no longer going to be able to ask me about this very sensitive topic. But I am going to tell you that you're probably too stupid to understand, and the people who are watching this hearing and the journalists and the public don't understand what the FBI is doing to violate their privacy systematically and get creative so that they can circumvent the Fourth Amendment and violate your privacy rights without having to worry about oversight and answering to members of Congress. You know, we've gotten really good at fundamentally engineering different methods so that it's hard for people to detect what we're doing, and that way we can accomplish our objectives no matter what, even though we've had objections, even though we've gone through cycles of outrage over people having their privacy systematically violated. So I'm going to get you a briefing, and ma'am, I'm going to tell you how we do. I'm going to sit you down and I'm going to force you to accept that what we do is not a violation of people's privacy rights, not a violation of the Constitution, is within the rule. That's okay, ma'am, if we come back to you at some point with this, because I'm looking at the clock. We have less than a minute right now. And so you're just going to have to wait. I really would, as you can tell, prefer not to talk about this in an open session, and just take my word for it that you could never understand what we do at the FBI. So that's Christopher Wray. That's the attitude of someone who understands and recognizes that they get to be unaccountable if they throw their weight around. There's only so much that the Congress of the United States is going to do to make sure that people don't have their privacy rights violated. I mean, shoot, we're 20 years removed from an event in which the Patriot Act passed, and everything changed, and all sorts of surveillance programs were adopted. All kinds of damage has been inflicted, and technologies have been allowed to change, with then the FBI sinking their claws into it so that they can siphon off data and get these streams without having to ask permission for it. not going to go to a court and ask for a warrant to get any of this. So there's Pramila. She's asking about that. I've got one more clip for you all from this hearing, and then we'll move on to our last topic. And it will be about progressives versus Cornell West 2024. So let me get this video file on the screen. This is Representative Zoe Lofgren, and here she is talking about the same thing that we've been talking about, but coming at it again from, I think, a little bit of a different angle. And also, there's a exchange that happens, or a comment at the end of this clip that I put together that I just want to include in my coverage.
I want to ask you another question. In the Senate hearing, in response to Senator Wyden's question of whether the FBI is currently purchasing Americans' location data, you indicated that it was limited to data derived from internet advertising. It's since been reported that the FBI has admitted it bought U.S. location data. Is the FBI purchasing location data from commercial sources without a warrant?
This is an area that requires a little more precision and context for me to be able to answer that fully. So let me have my staff follow back up with you so that I make sure that I don't leave something important out.
I'll just close with the FBI had 3.4 million backdoor searches of the FISA database without a warrant in 2021. Can you say whether the FBI is continuing to search the FISA database without a warrant for Americans?
Well, if you're asking about our use of 702 queries,
I am.
those are, there is no warrant requirement under the Fourth Amendment for those queries. It's fairly well settled. The 3.4 million figure that you're talking about, I guess I would say a couple things. One, that's not 3.4 million people. That's 3.4 million search terms or query terms. Second, that's not those are not queries in violation of rules. Those are just queries under the
My time has
procedure.
expired, but the committee will look into the warrant requirement later in the process.
You sure will. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
The American people need to understand what just happened. My Democrat colleague just asked the director of the FBI whether or not they are buying information about our fellow Americans, and the answer is, well, we'll just have to get back to you on that. It sounds really complicated, but I have other questions.
Matt Gaetz is one of the most annoying turds in Congress, but he has a point. He has a point. And I think that puts the exclamation point on what the FBI director was doing today in Congress in not giving them, what he could have anticipated they would ask about. It's been a subject of an oversight hearing in the Senate, and they know that the House would be interested, that the House Judiciary Committee would want to discuss this matter, and to come without anything prepared, even just some basic talking points. It tells you how much they want to dodge it. They're hiding something. This is a signal, and any journalist with access who is worth anything should see this as a sign that something is afoot with the FBI. And it always is. It's always the case that there's some kind of creativity going on to circumvent the restrictions or rules, or to flout the privacy expectations that you and I have, the reasonable privacy expectations that we're expected to have, which get diminished more and more every single year. What is supposed to be a reasonable expectation of privacy has been fundamentally altered in my lifetime and all of your lifetimes, especially since 9/11. It has been the case that there is less privacy that we are told we can expect. But even that little bit of privacy, the little tiny bit of privacy that we're supposed to still have, FBI Director Christopher Wray is trying to buy data from these firms so that they do not have to worry about the lack of access to it without a warrant. And so